a DMing episode on prep. And I admit that I do virtually no prep when I run games, especially when it comes to my homebrew campaigns. It's something I've been asked to cover in an episode before, and for whatever reason I've had trouble qualifying it. Fortunately, joining us today is the man who wrote the book on lazy DMing, author of the Sly Flourish gaming blog, and the Lazy Dungeon Master available from show sponsor DriveThruRPG at drivethrough.rpg.com, Mr. Mike Shea.
Hello.
How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing very well.
Well, we're happy to have you on the program, but for those who might not know who you are you?
Oh, who is anybody? I don't know.
Mike, that is a great question.
Yeah, let's get really theological about it. I am a web designer and a project manager in Washington, D.C., and God, I'll make this as short as possible because it bores most everybody.
No worries.
I've played D&D for probably 20 years or so, since I was about, maybe a little bit longer, since I was about 15 or 16, and have run through 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 2nd edition, 3.5, 4E, next. So I've played them all, and most recently and most notably, when 4E came out, I started right away and started a website called Sly Flourish, where I wanted to help myself and help other dungeon masters become better. You know, the internet is a wonderful way. I was talking to my wife just about this just recently. I think the internet has made us all is like an order of magnitude useful tool in making us all better DMs. I think we've all gotten 10 times better as DMs because we are on the internet and we're able to hear how other people DM, and we're able to pick up tips that other people run, and we're able to listen to games and watch games that we never were able to before. So I wanted to get involved in that. So I started up the website Sly Flourish, which was focused just on that, and then wrote 3 books about it. Sly Flourish's Dungeon Master Tips, which was a 4E focused short book on tips for running D&D games, or specifically 4E games. Sly Flourish's Running Epic Tier D&D Games, which kind of encapsulated tips and tricks for running very high level 4th edition games, 21 to 30, level 21 to 30. And most recently, the Lazy Dungeon Master, which is agnostic towards D&D, any version of D&D, and focused on how to run a better game with less prep.
I noticed in your listing of the games you've played, you skipped over 3.0.
Yeah, that was just, not for any particular reason. When I was in college, we started with we had 2nd edition, and 2nd edition was what I started with in high school. And I had a gaming group in college, and then Magic the Gathering came out, and all of our D&D people went over to play Magic the Gathering, and I did that through college and through first getting out of college. And then I got into EverQuest in a really big way, the massive online game EverQuest, for like 5 years or 6 years, and met my wife through EverQuest, and she played 3.5, and she had a bunch of friends that played 3.5, so I got involved at that point. So I just kind of missed 3.0. In fact, I think it was right at the end. It was right when 3.5 came out, because I had a 3.0 monster manual, and then immediately had to buy the 3.5 one like a week later. So it was right on the edge when 3.5 came out.
Yeah, that's around when I got into it too. We found a bunch of guys from high school got together and were like, we've played Dungeons & Dragons we used to play Dungeons & Dragons, we haven't played it for years. 3rd edition is out, everyone says it's great, let's get into it. Mm-hmm. And half the group bought some books, and then the other half just kind of mooched off of them, thinking they were so smart. But then 3.5 was announced almost immediately after we started playing. Mm-hmm. So the people that bought books kind of looked at the people who were mooching and like, guys.
Your turn.
Exactly.
Very good. Yeah.
So luckily we didn't lose too much of an investment, but yeah, it was kind of a frustrating start to what ended up being a popular edition for almost all of us.
Yeah. And we played 3.5 probably monthly, and for about 4 years. However long it was from about the time 3.5 came out till the time 4th edition came out, which I think 4 or 5 years. 5 years.
I think 4 years is the number.
Yeah, and played a level 1 to 13. We had a campaign that was like levels 1 to 13 on about a monthly basis. So a lot of fun times.
Now we should get it out of the way that your blog is named after 4th edition power.
That is
You've
correct.
mentioned 4th edition a couple of times, and even though this podcast is for 3.5 loyalists,
Yep.
we have a truce. It's a no edition wars podcast. It used to be at one time, anytime we would say anything, any kind of criticism for 4th edition or Wizards of the Coast, even constructive criticism, we would follow it up with something positive about this. Oh, Pathfinder, I did not expect that.
Yeah, I have the whole set. I just bought it.
Cool. What got you into Pathfinder?
I haven't played it yet. I played.
Okay.
I played one. I played one. I didn't mean to interrupt with my edition warring, just to show that I have lots of versions of D&D sitting here, including first. Hey, look at this. You want to get really old school.
Oh, cool. I was expecting the re-release from last year.
Yeah, I have the re-release as well. But my wife, I inherited. One of the wonderful things that getting married to a nerd is I inherited her entire set of first edition stuff because she played.
Awesome. I like your wife more and more. Can we get her on the podcast?
Sure, she'd be better at it. She'd come here and tell you what's really going on.
Well, you did release 2 books that were specific to 4th edition, but fortunately, the one on lazy DMing and the one that probably most universally applies to all DM players, D&D players, was system neutral. So, what can you tell us about the book, the Lazy Dungeon Master?
The core premise of the book, and this is something I discovered after starting to write it and after thinking a lot about it. The core premise of the book isn't just that there are easier ways to be a dungeon master and that we don't have to work as hard as we do sometimes. That was the initial thing going in, was this doesn't have to be as hard as we're making it. Prepping for a game doesn't have to be as hard as we're making it. What I discovered and what I learned reading a lot and doing a lot of research and I ran a big Dungeons and Dragons survey, and I talked to dozens and dozens of DMs and interviewed, did formal interviews with 12 different DMs about prep style. What I discovered is that not only does less prep make it easier on the DM, less prep can actually make for a better game than a game with more prep. That isn't always true, and there's lots of little, barbed hooks in that whole statement that can cause trouble. One is that's kind of an advanced concept. It's not something I would recommend to somebody that is starting to run a D&D game for the first time. But I think it's a pretty powerful one for somebody that's got at least a couple of dozen games that they've run. They can start to strip things back and start to figure out what's really important and what isn't. So that was the core premise of the book. I wanted to make sure that I had a book that was based on information, based on a lot of different points of view, not just my own. I worried that my previous 2 books were really kind of Mike Shea's big ideas on stuff. And I mean, even those, the Epic Tier one was more of that just because nobody else was doing Epic Tier 4th edition stuff.
Including Wizards of the Coast.
I don't know. I didn't know anybody else or hadn't really had exposure to other people who had really run a full level 1 to 30 campaign. And I wanted to hear about that. This one I really wanted to talk to a lot of people. I really wanted to do a lot of research, and I wanted to see what I found, or see what conclusions came of it, and and then also not turn it into something that was an actual practical book. Turn it into something that people could use and would help people not waste their time and not spend a lot of time on something they think is really useful and then find out later that it's not.
Now, you do have a blog, though. Why go to publishing? Why not just post this as a series on your blog?
Well, it would have been about a year-long series, probably longer. If you give me 1 second, I'll tell you exactly how many chapters is in this thing. But it's a lot. I mean, it's not a huge book because I don't write really long essays. I don't really. The chapters are relatively focused, but there's a fair bit of them. Now you got me looking it up.
While you're looking up, can you just kind of ballpark? Do you remember about? Are we talking a dozen?
Dozens or so. Yeah. Yeah. So according to this, that the total, which includes appendices and stuff like that, is it's 23 chapters for the main one with three different appendices, And then one of those appendices is interviews with 12 different dungeon masters, and each of those is about 3 times longer than an article that I would do on my blog. So it's a fair bit of information. The other one is, the other reason to do it is because I wanted to focus around one single concept, and the blog I want it to kind of reach out to another bunch of different things. And the third is I like writing books, and I think that this is going to sound kind of markety and capitalist. We're
pro-capitalist on this podcast.
Good. I'm glad we're pro-capitalist. And it wasn't just about making money. It's that there's value to the words that goes beyond free. Words on a blog are not free, right? People are paying with their attention, which is actually something I'm more conscious of than the money. I think that it's an affordable book. It's $6. And it's actually, I want to make sure that I'm not wasting someone's time or steering them in the wrong direction is actually more important to me. And that's something I think about with the blog as well. But I think that when the amount of research I did behind it and then the focus of the book, I wanted to package it together into one thing. And, my dad was an author and our family lived on that. So we're certainly not living on this, but I think that there's value to it. And I think that, I love ebook publishing. I think it's really the future of this kind of.
Is it print on demand? I've only seen it as a PDF.
It is. So there's 3 different versions of it. Well, there's a kind of a whole bunch of different versions, but 3 main versions available. There is a print on demand that you can get from Lulu. I do not really recommend that one. That's for like the collector. If you really have to have a paper copy that you want to have sitting on a shelf and you really love paper, that's the way to go. The price that costs is higher than I think it's worth.
About $25?
No. It's like 12.
12 for a printed book. Come on.
Yeah. Well, it's 10, and you're paying for shipping and handling. I think is like 3, so it's like $13. So no, it's not terrible, but I'm very conscious of exactly what the price was for this. When I sat out, I said, okay, I really think that $6 is the right price for something like this. And granted, it actually, a fair bit of more work went into this than went into Epic Tier and Dungeon Master Tips, but that was mainly because those books paid for this one. So I didn't know how well those were going to do at all, and I didn't want to turn it into a vanity publication. I didn't want me fronting all the money and not getting it, not having it earn its keep. But they did well. Again, I'm not living on it, but they paid for my hobby and they paid for, Gen Con. So I figured that there's no reason that the money for those couldn't go into better design and some other kind of features for this one. The main one being internal page design, which Eric Nowak did, and I think did a really, really fabulous job, particularly in the large format PDF. So there's 3 different versions of the book. There's an ebook package, which includes 2 different PDFs, EPUB and Mobi, and you can put that on any device, and there's no DRM, and you can, do whatever you want. And that one is the best deal for the customer and the best deal for me. I get a higher commission on that than anything else, and it's the same price as you would get. It's the lowest price of all of them, and it has the most versions of the book in the most formats. You can get it on Kindle, and you can get it on Barnes & Noble Nook, and you can get it on the Apple iBook Store. Those versions, of course, are much more convenient if you just want to buy from those versions, but you can't really transfer them across devices, and it's harder to back them up, and you don't get the really well-formatted PDF that you get with the ebook package. So that the ebook package is the main one that I think people will want.
Right, well, we've talked about the money that goes into it. I hope you don't mind giving a little free advice coming out of your book and actually diving into the content of Lazy Dungeon Master.
No, love talking about it.
All right. So when we're talking about lazy DMing, how lazy are we talking about? How little prep do you think you can get away with and still have a good session?
5 minutes.
Nice.
And that makes some of the assumptions that you already have some material on hand, and that you've already kind of there's some pre-work in that. So I don't think like you could go, grab a book off a shelf and in 5 minutes have a good game. If you're like, I couldn't run a Pathfinder game in 5 minutes, having never played Pathfinder, having never run a Pathfinder game before. I think you can get to the point where when you're experienced with a system and have the right tools on hand, that you can do game prep in 5 minutes. In fact, I bet you could probably do it with 0. I think the only thing that stops one from doing it with no prep time is the panic attack of, oh my God, I have absolutely nothing and everyone's going to hate me. And I think the 5 minutes is as little as you can get away with that will curb that fear and still give you enough that you're, and still keep it open enough that the game will go in kind of whatever direction you want to go.
So if 5 minutes is the minimum, what's the benchmark? What's the average lazy DM? What should he put into a game?
I have no idea I think it's good. It's going to depend drastically on the DM. I don't, I try to be pretty clear with this book up front that this isn't the way to be a dungeon master, right? That the way of the lazy dungeon master isn't the only way, and every other way is wrong. And you're an idiot if you ever, spend a good amount of time doing world building. It's really to kind of say, this is one way, and this is, you could kind of go, all out and do it this way. But really, there's a bunch of different things that you could do, or a bunch of different things you can think about that may change how you do prep overall. So I don't know if there's a median. I don't know if there's a clear, like, the average dungeon master who's studied lazy dungeon master techniques can do it in 24 minutes instead of 5. But I mean, when I say 5, I'm not kidding around. I do about 5 minutes of prep now for every game that I run. For the most part, I did a D&D Lair Assault recently, and that took me longer to find the minis. But generally speaking, I grab a 3x5 card. I jot down, where is the game going to start? I jot down 3 potential directions the game might go. I'll, kind of figure out what's going on with the major NPCs, and then I'm done. And we sit down and we go.
So you're saying the average was 24 minutes. That was the crux of what you were just saying there, right?
No, that wasn't what I said.
What are some of the fundamental differences between a session that's heavily prepped and a zero prep session, or a 5 minute to 24 minute prep session?
I think that one major difference, and a lot will depend on the DM, but one major difference is the level of commitment that the DM is bringing to the table. And that commitment isn't always good. And that's the second half of this, right? The first half of it is you really don't have to do everything you think you need to do. The second half is the less you do, the better the game is going to be. And that comes from not being committed to what you made. So one way you'll be able to tell, so there's a couple ways. Like if somebody walks in and you have an entire table full of Dwarven Forge that's, 3 layers of 3 vertical layers of platforms and, special lighting effects. And I've done all this and it's fun and people love it. Special lighting effects and a soundtrack, that you put together that has all the right music for what you're doing, and handouts, really nice, handouts that are printed on vellum so they feel like real scrolls and all this stuff. There's definitely going to be people like, wow, this is a production. I just walked into a Broadway show. This isn't, 5 guys around a table with some graph paper and Cheetos. This is a real show. And, I've had people that really like that. The funny thing is, like, 3 sessions like that, and they're back to playing D&D, right? It kind of doesn't matter that you have the big, giant table full of stuff and everything like that. I'm interested in what my guy does. And so that's one way you'll notice, is certainly if you see all those kinds of things, that people have really prepped a lot. The other one, though, is when you see the DM starting to get nervous or antsy when people start to go off the track. And sometimes there's a player who just does it on purpose. I always joke. I play in a game that a friend of mine runs, and I'll sit down there and he's always like, so you have these options. And I go, well, which option will be the most painful for you? And he says, well, I really don't have anything for the boat. And I'm like, we go on the boat, right? So there's always a guy like me, a jerk who's always like, well, what if I kill it? Like, what did Chris Perkins, I think, told a story at Gen Con this last year, where he said that he had this whole kind of setup and this whole plan, and there was this major NPC who had this incredible backstory and this incredible detail, who met the PCs on a mountaintop, and the first guy that saw him grabbed him and threw him off the cliff. And he's like, whoa, that was okay, I guess I don't know where we're going from here. And when you have that kind of commitment, and then somebody throws your major NPC off a cliff, if you're not prepared, if you've prepared too much, now you really feel like you got nothing. Only you're not prepared to not have nothing. You know,
I
so
got it.
what do what do you do then? And so I think I think you see it when the players start to take things off the rails, and the DM is like, hey, cool, you know, and the DM is really drawing the story of the game from the players. This is something I'm studying a lot more. I'm reading a lot more about in other game systems like Fate Core and Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, which my Christmas break I spent a lot of time reading over these other game systems, and that's something that seems pretty fundamental and paramount in those systems. 13th Age also does this, where the game is really built from the backgrounds of the characters. I've always been big into Fiasco. Well, not always, but since playing Fiasco, I've always kind of brought aspects of Fiasco into my game. If you're not familiar with Fiasco, it's a very heavy story-based game where all of the characters and all the interaction of the characters is determined at the table, like while you're going. And it's got a nice rigid system for saying, like, okay, what are the relationships between you and the player on your left, or the character on your left? And I started bringing that into D&D, and the stories start to come out of that. If you start to see stuff like that in a game, then you know that the DM hasn't prepped. Or what they prepped was very different from what most DMs prep, which is what encounters am I going to run, and what's the dungeon going to look like, or how are these two nations warring with one another.
So then you're talking about plot and using the characters to create the plot, but how do you then keep the plot consistent? How do you make a proper story instead of just a series of events if you're not doing any prep?
Well, that's interesting. Let me ask you, what is a proper story?
Well, it has a beginning, middle, and end, thematically tied together. Usually consistent characters, but you never know when somebody's just going to die. I know that role-playing does have its own storytelling tropes and ways that it's different from any other form of storytelling. But generally, if you, say, are running a canned adventure, you can tell from the end how you got there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've read Song of Ice and Fire, the George R.R. Martin books?
I haven't.
Oh, okay. Have you read any Stephen King books?
Well, yes.
What's the one with the plague? I can't believe I'm forgetting.
The one with the plague is not The Shining.
The Stand?
Yes, The Stand.
Have you read The Stand?
No. I don't do nearly enough reading, so just assume that the listeners have and go from there.
Okay, yeah. So those are a couple of popular. But the interesting things about some of these books, and I'm also one of the other forms of fiction I really love are kind of the new dramatic series, like the big HBO Deadwood and The Wire and Sons of Anarchy and The Shield and all these kind of hard gritty Breaking Bad, hard gritty dramas. And one of the things that always draws me to these shows is when they don't have a clear story. When I don't know where they're headed and I can't figure it out. Like between character interaction and random circumstance, the story is going to change. And that's what makes me watch them, because if I know where they're going, I'm already bored, right? Because then they become, right brain, I can just wrap it up into a nice, pretty package and I already know the ending and I can get on to the next one. So to me, like, the real interesting stories are when I don't know, what's going to happen. And in the beginning, anybody that's going to be spoiled, well, you haven't read it, so maybe I won't spoil it. But, there are major character changes in the first book of Game of Thrones that is why that we're all paying attention to that book. It's why we all know of it. And, had he gone a pretty traditional route, we'd just chalked it up as normal fantasy and put it on the shelf. But because he had these like 180-degree meteor comes out of the sky and kills your main character sort of moments, that's not actually what happens, by the way. We follow it. And I think that, to me, an interesting story is when I really have no idea where they're going to go. Hey, food arrived. This is my wife, by the way, who I was saying that played EverQuest.
Oh, my goodness. We've been talking all about you.
Yeah.
You're our new favorite wife.
She can't hear you. I have
headphones on. Oh, of course not. That's
on. She did bring fine homemade pizza, though.
Oh, very nice.
But I will set it aside.
Hand-rolled dough?
Yes.
Ooh,
yeah,
lucky
she's
man.
Awesome. She's the best wife ever. And she edited the book.
You're going to have a wife fight with my wife then.
Not only did I inherit an entire set of first edition books, and not only do I get homemade pizza, and not only am I going to steal her computer next time I need to use Skype, she also is a professional editor, and she edited all of my books for free.
That's pretty handy.
Yeah. Anyway,
I think your wife would get along well with my wife.
great. Should get together sometime.
They have to.
I don't remember what I was talking about.
You were talking about a Game of Thrones. Actually, I'll
stories.
pick up something you were saying about Breaking Bad. Because, yes, maybe it does feel a little bit like it could go anywhere. But if you think of the second season, which started with the floating eyeball in the pool and constantly wondering what is the payoff for this going to be? Well, we get the payoff by the last episode of the second season.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of thing. Like, how do you do a tie together like that if it's completely driven by the characters and by the players?
Yeah. I think one way to do it is to, that the main story might come from the players themselves in the first session, and then that becomes kind of the flag. And instead of plotting it out, instead it's not bad to have a goal. Like you know that Frodo's got to get rid of the ring, right? How he's going to get to Mordor, right? The big joke. Why didn't the Eagles take him, right? Why did we have to go through all that? It's fine to have like a good idea of where things are going. I had it. I had a whole campaign that was basically you're going to go kill Orcus, right? And it's going to be a 30 level campaign about them hunting down and killing Orcus, or sometimes him hunting them down. But in the meantime, and it's fine to have that, but it's always fun to not know how they're going to get there, right? That you don't need to have an arc. The arc will kind of come on its own. My experience has been that it comes on its own, and instead it's kind of okay. Well, what's the main goal of this, or what are the three main goals? And then maybe one of them will start to resonate, and then the players will start to gravitate in that direction. I think that's kind of the big difference between a game that's on the rails, a game that has loose guidelines, and a game that's completely sandbox, right? And that the sandbox one, there is not even a flag anywhere, where a loose rails kind of has a general direction that it's going. I don't know. I think that I think I think a lot of that will come out, and I don't think that DMs have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. And I do think that if we do spend a lot of time thinking about it, it's actually worse than letting it go. One of the I was reading the Apocalypse World book, and it has a lot of, Apocalypse World is a very interesting role-playing game system, and it uses what they refer to in computer programming as an opinionated system, right? It's in computer programming world, they call that opinionated software, right? Software that's meant to be written a certain way. Ruby on Rails, for example, follows this. And in the Apocalypse World, it is an opinionated RPG. It has a specific way it's expecting you to play, and that way is very sandboxy, very zero prep, and it has like the mantra, right? And it reads like a manifesto. That it reads really interesting, by the way. It's like the most crazy. I have never seen a role-playing game with more four-letter words. That's just part of the description of what you should be doing. It's not even narrative, right? Than I did in Apocalypse World, but it's an interesting read. You feel a little funky afterwards, a little
Is that
twitchy.
a John Wick
twitchy.
game?
I don't remember who wrote it. That is Vincent Baker.
Okay.
It. And it's very good, and it's worth reading, and I want to play it. I don't want to run it until I've played it because it scares me, but I like it. And anyway, so he has, and I'm misquoting, and I don't have the quote here, but something along the lines of draw lots of maps and leave lots of blanks, right? And I think that's interesting, that we want to fill it all in, right? We want to have, we hate having space, and we hate having unknowns, and we hate having like, well, I have to have this done this way, God, and our brains will fill it in. And if we're not careful, we'll fill Moleskine notebooks full of this stuff, right? And then it's already written, and you're like, yeah, but nobody's even played it yet, and it's already all written, right? So it's far more interesting to kind of say like, oh, I have no idea, what it is. So, I've had many games where I'd say like, well, there's a dark beast in the Southern Hall, and they're like, ooh, what's that? And I'm like, I don't know. Go down there and find out. I'm interested to find out too. And it's that idea of like leaving lots of blanks where the story really becomes dynamic. It's very easy to not think about stuff, but sometimes it's really hard too. right? Sometimes it's really hard not to let your brain fill it all in, and we want to. And it's better, I think, it's more interesting to kind of let things roll for a while, and then something really great happens, you know? So I think that that's one way to approach storytelling. I mean, certainly nothing wrong with somebody filling out a big part of the story, but the question is, at what point are you writing a novel and not really playing a game?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that that's the big risk on the other side, is you spell everything out so much that then the players sit down and the players have like 3 paragraphs of background story, and you're like, yeah, that's great. You all start at a bar, right? And that's real easy to do, and it happens with pre-played games all the time, pre-gen games or organized play games, and it certainly happens if you're playing a module. Unless you start the module with, okay, here's the module and here's the theme of the module. Now we'll build our characters around that.
Is there any crossover between lazy DMing and running a module?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter about running modules and how to use published stuff. And there's some really interesting stuff about published adventures that I've been thinking a lot about over the past year or so, which is I'm not sure if they're designed right. You know, I'm not sure if I don't know that published modules are built correctly. And the reason I say that is something that Chris Perkins said in a panel at PAX Prime this last year. I think I'm getting it right. It's either that or it's in one of his articles. And he said that most people read dungeon adventures but never play them. Right? That the customer for a dungeon, and that this has been true for 30 years, right? Or since Dungeon Magazine's been around. That people love to read them and use them as inspiration for their adventures, but they don't tend to run them as is. And I think back to all of the published modules that I've used, and I don't know that I've ever run them like they're written. I'm always twisting and turning and tuning them, and always throwing in new things, and always pulling out stuff I don't like, and always skipping stuff that's boring, and always adding stuff that, you know, comes to me. And I think that I don't know that modules are designed to do that. I think they're written from beginning to end, and they have all of the rooms, and they've spelled everything out, and they have all the encounters built. And it's, you know, they're not built as modules. They're built as structure. And what I want is, give me all the pieces that I need. Right? And this is a big lazy DM thing, that give me 3 NPCs so that I don't have to come up with 3. Give me a good town and describe the town, you know, but not so much that I get bogged down with 30 pages of town. I need like 1 page of town. You know, give me the 7 most interesting places. Give me, you know, something that's specific enough that it spurns my, you know, creativity to make it into something, but general enough that I don't, you know, that I actually have some room to build something. An example of this was Dark Sun. When I ran a campaign in Dark Sun, the Dark Sun campaign sourcebook has these great like 3-paragraph descriptions, and a lot of the recent Wizard stuff has this. In fact, I think some of the old Wizard stuff had this too. They'll have like a 3-paragraph description of an area. You know, they'll say like, there's a lost monument, and that, you know, 10,000 years ago, before the Sorcerer Kings took over, you know, an evil cult used to do rites here, but it's now been forgotten and buried in the dust. It's recently come out, and gnolls have taken it over. And that's all they give you, right? They don't give you a map, and they don't tell you about the gnoll chief, and they don't tie it to other stuff. But it's just enough to kind of go, if the players go there, I know what I have to do. And I can do it, right? I can build out what that means, and I can kind of tie that in. And I don't need, you know, 32 pages of detail. I only need 3 paragraphs. And I think that might be one of the problems with the way modules are designed, is that you can't really sell the kind of thing I'm talking about, because what I'm talking about might only be 3 pages. So, so I don't know. There is a lot of value in modules. You know, I pulled out the thing that actually got me to buy the rest of the Pathfinder set, is I bought the hardback of the whole Rise of the Rune Lords series, this giant book that's like, I think it's 1 to 18, right? It's some huge number of adventures. And I bought it, even though I've been thinking a lot of this stuff, because you can steal so much from them. You know, it's full of maps. Like, if nothing else, you have a big pile of maps. You know, and you have some interesting NPCs, and you have some battles that are kind of pre-published, and there's usually a lot there, and there's usually enough of a seed to kind of get you in the right direction. I think it's wrapped up in probably, you know, 80% extra words that I don't need. and frankly, it's extra words that I got to carve through in order to find the stuff that's useful to me. but there's still a lot there that I'm just not going to get anywhere else. I don't want to have to go dig up maps for stuff. And, I needed a seaside village all of a sudden, and, just flip through some maps and find a seaside village and you're ready to go. Call it something else.
You also talked about combat and that Can Adventure is a good place for really dynamic combat with interesting setup. Let's say you don't have access to a module right now. What's the best way and the laziest way to make an interesting dynamic combat?
That's a good, yeah. So it's a really good question, and it's something that I'm not sure the lazy DM thing really grabs well yet. I also think it's pretty system dependent. 3.5, I think, had less of a boundary around what it referred to as a battle, right? More so than 4E. 4E has encounters, right? And an encounter is a set period of time that isn't necessarily set to time, but you have powers that last until the end of the encounter. You have things, the encounter is a set duration of events, and when one begins because you rolled initiative, and when it ends because the DM says we're all done. And 3.5 had a little bit more fluidity, I think, and at least the way when I ran 3.5 a while ago. So I think that how they're treated can be different depending on the system and the expectation that the players bring to a battle. I know that in running some of my D&D Next battles, when I was getting feedback from players on how they liked the game and how things went, one of the comments was that, well, sometimes I don't feel like we're getting enough interesting environmental effects like we used to in fourth, and that's because fourth, it's like one of the layers, right? Like if you think of combat in fourth, you've got these layers. You have, what does the battle area look like? What are the monsters that are in that area? What are the terrain that's in that area? What are some things that the players can mess with in that area? What little skill things could take place that are in that area? And what's the combat out? What's the thing that's going to turn the encounter off that isn't just killing all the other guys? And if you have all those layers and you change all those layers, you can have an infinite number of interesting battles, right? But you have to come up with all those layers. So doing it in a lazy DM way is a little tough. But I think, you can cover two of the layers really easily. And that's by having a really good set of poster maps and having a really good monster book. For 4th edition, the Monster Vault, it's nice that I have my entire set of D&D stuff right here.
I appreciate because I've heard of the Monster Vault. I've heard it mentioned
Yes.
a lot, but I don't get what makes it a Monster Vault as opposed to a Monster Manual.
Marketing.
All right.
What makes it? They had a monster manual, right? So they couldn't call it the 4.5 monster manual because then you have a rebellion. So they called it the Monster Vault to be something else. It's a trade paperback. It's a soft cover book. For 4th edition, this is the best monster book that has been and will ever be released, in my opinion. It's got 5 years worth of refinement on these guys, and it's got all the basic monsters in it. It has everything from basically level 1 to 20. They kind of chinsed out on the epic tier stuff on this, but that's okay because epic tier never really worked that well anyway. But the Pathfinder Beastery, which I also happen to have here, another one. And what I love about these monster books is that they usually have all of the pretty typical monsters that you would need, and they're usually well tuned. Like you should get whatever book has the most well tuned monsters for whatever version you're running. You guys play 3.5, so what is your favorite monster book from 3.5 that you feel has the most well balanced monsters?
The original Monster Manual.
The original Monster Manual. Yeah.
It just has such core fantasy creatures in it.
Well, that's right. And I think fourth got hurt because the first Monster Manual, the monsters were not well tuned, and there was a power scale that didn't work when it compared to the power of the players. So when you hit a certain level, the monsters just weren't threatening, and they had to redo all of the damage for it. And when they had to do all the damage, then the book is useless. So later on, and the reason why the Monster Vault, the monsters are really tough in here. They run a lot better than the monsters did. And it's got all those original monsters, right? It's got ogres and dragons and everything that you would expect. So having a good set of poster maps means that when you need an encounter area, you can just pull out the encounter that you need. Having a really good monster book means that you don't have to worry about having your monsters ready beforehand. You can just pull out the book, go to the monster you need, and run it right out of the book. Which is why I like having actual physical books rather than having it online and things like that, because it can be kind of hard to muck around online to get the monster you want. So then the next trick is like, well, what about environmental effects and traps and stuff like that? And I don't have a real good way to do that yet. I think that you can kind of come up with some generic ones, and if you have an idea about how your system handles the math, you can kind of come up with them on the fly. For the one nice thing about 4th edition is that it's pretty well refined into like how much damage per level something should do. Which means if you know that off the top of your head, you can come up with an environmental effect off the top of your head. So if I have a 16th level battle, I know right off the bat that I need to have, 16 and 7 is 23? I need to do about 23 damage. Is that right? Yeah. Good at math. I need to do an average of 23 damage on a hit with an environmental effect. So then I can kind of say, okay, well, there are fire traps in the corner. When you run into them, they hit you for 23 damage or, 3d6 plus whatever. You can come up with them pretty quickly on the fly and, not have to have a whole bunch of stuff set up originally. I don't know that 3.5 had that kind of damage per level curve.
There's a chart in the back of the monster manual that more or less says if you're making your own monster,
okay,
this is how you set the CR. And so you do have the ballpark numbers statted out pretty accurately.
It has damage.
It has damage, AC, saving throw, DCs.
Yeah, I couldn't remember, and I would assume Pathfinder has the same thing, but I don't remember.
Same idea, slightly different numbers.
Okay, yeah. So having that chart, and in fact, I have one for 4th edition that I've used for a long time. It's been pretty popular on the site, and because it's one page that has everything you need, and a lot of times that's in the DM screens have that kind of stuff too. And just use that, you don't have to, come up with something crazy. Come up with something pretty simple. I mean, our lives are hard enough already as a DM. We don't have to come up with really unique stuff. It's fine to have a flame trap that, hits like a dragon whelp, and they're running around. So if you tweak those other things, and then the other big environmental thing is, well, what's going to end the battle? Again, this is kind of 4E specific because 4E battles took so long that if you went through the slog of making sure that every monster was dead by the time you ended combat, the combat would take like an hour and a half at least. So you need a kind of a thing of when the main guy dies, all of his minions immediately are either run away or are destroyed or surrender. That's an easy one. The other one is if his 3 guardians are dead, then he teleports away and dies. Or if his special crystal orb in the center of the room explodes, then his soul is destroyed. You can have all these kind of things that you can make up, and as you get better at those, Dave Chalker from Critical Hits is the one that kind of clued me into this, and he calls them combat outs, and the more you get in tune with how to do these things, the more you can use them on the fly, and it's actually better to use them on the fly because trying to come up with ones that are prepared, the players will always find a way to get around it. Like they'll just, the way they will operate won't sit with whatever combat out you created beforehand that you were sure would help you in the battle.
Well, Mike, we are out of time, so I want to thank you so much for joining us. You carried this episode, so thank you for that. Do you have any?
Does that mean I talked a lot?
But in a good way.
Oh, in a good way.
In a good way. Yeah, no, there have been some times where people go on tangents, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just want you to stop. But no, I don't think you ever did that. Are there any other websites, system neutral preferably, or any other tools you can recommend to people that really want to be lazy DMs?
Wow, there are a lot.
Including, of course, your own.
Well, so my website is still pretty 4E specific, and it's leaning towards D&D Next. There's a few system neutral kind of things on there that I'd recommend. Get a good name generator. There's one called Yet Another Yefnag, I think it's called. Another fantasy name generator. Yet Another fantasy name generator. There it is. Yeah, YAFNAG, and they can Google it, or Yet Another fantasy name generator. Having a really good set of random names on hand is really vital. Product-wise, I highly recommend the Game Mastery Flip Maps by Paizo. I also recommend the map packs that Wizards of the Coast just recently put out. I think they've got 2 out now, and there's a 3rd one on the way. Those are the cheapest ways to get good, high-quality poster maps. And the better your poster maps are, it's even easier than drawing out your own. You just, like, you're in the woods, just pull out the woods one. So building a collection of those, I think, is really vital. love your monster book. You know, don't try to constantly come up with new monsters, and don't make your own monsters. Just, you know, use the monster book. Other websites. I don't know. Those are kind of the big ones, I think. I'm sure there's lots that I'm forgetting offhand.
Well, if people post on the forums questions for you, can I forward them to you, or can I
Yeah,
forward you a link?
Sure.
All right. So if anyone has any questions or their own stories about being a lazy DM, you can go to the forums at 35privatesanctuary.com. Click on the forums link at the top of the page. Register if you haven't already, and post your thoughts in episode 212, Lazy Dungeon Masters. And we will be right back after this.